Hi again, this is Cate, and this is the third recording of the section in Gary Renard's book called A Note from the Author about A Course in Miracles. And it's from Gary Renard's book, The Lifetimes When Jesus and Buddha Knew Each Other. So at the start of this book, Gary does a really wonderful review, analogy, summary of A Course in Miracles. And I really felt guided to put this out on a video so you can just sit back and listen to it if you like. It's a great summary, and sometimes we just need to hear a summary of the course and the ideas of the course over and over. So I sometimes put my own little comments in here and there. So this is video 3. So if you're starting here, I suggest you start at the first video. So the world we once believed in is a dream and nothing more. William Shakespeare, who according to my teachers was enlightened, was right on the money when he wrote these words in The Tempest. So this is a William Shakespeare poem. You do look, my son, in a moved sort, as if you were dismayed. Be cheerful, sir. Our revels now are ended. These our actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits and are melted into air, into thin air, and like the basic fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the glorious palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, ye all which it inherit, shall dissolve, and like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with sleep. These words would fit very comfortably into the text of A Course in Miracles. The course leads to lucid dreaming on a whole new level. Eventually, you become aware that you are dreaming. Every forgiveness opportunity is equally forgivable. You begin to relax. Real peace of mind is yours. Ironically, you function better in the dream because you can think more clearly and you have the guidance and inspiration of the Holy Spirit to lead you. To review the first step in forgiveness, you have to catch yourself thinking with the ego and stop it. That takes discipline because the ego is very clever and will come up with 1,000 different ways to convince you and others of bodies, which makes the whole thing true. Yet to repeat, the Holy Spirit has a totally different identity for you to remember. The Holy Spirit says for us to say, I am not a body, I am free, for I am still as God created me. This also applies to others. And the second step in forgiveness involves an understanding that what you're saying is not true. And you need to change your mind and think with the Holy Spirit instead of the ego. If you make it that far, the Holy Spirit will give you the right-minded ideas from the course that are the best for you to apply to the situation or event you find yourself involved in. Or you may not have to think at all. You may simply find yourself at peace. So I'd just like to make a comment here. So when you get to that dedication and watching the thoughts, catching yourself when you're upset and asking the Holy Spirit for help. And so the Holy Spirit will give you the right-minded ideas from the course that are best for you to apply to the situation or event you find yourself involved in. So what can happen is you might find that you all of a sudden start to remember something from the course, even something from this, what I'm saying now. something someone else has said. That's the Holy Spirit bringing it to your mind. That's the answer. So whenever you really ask for the truth, help me, Holy Spirit, have another perception. Please help change my perception so I can be at peace. Something will come into your mind to remind you of the truth. You can also apply the daily lesson. If you're doing the lessons, as he said, just apply the daily lesson to any situation or any time you're upset. And so what happens is our mind's getting healed, because remember, it's always the ego thought system that is upsetting us, nothing outside us. So we're changing the cause of the upset. So the Holy Spirit, when we're in the Holy Spirit mind, we're getting that change. The miracle is coming into our mind and we're feeling peaceful. Eventually, as the ego is undone, the Holy Spirit begins to dominate your mind. You'll be able to hear the messages and inspiration that come from the Holy Spirit more clearly. You can even receive answers to the practical questions you have about how to proceed with your illusory life. A life lived with the Holy Spirit is a totally different experience than one lived with the ego. Now you're never alone, even if you're the only person in the room. Your unconscious mind knows everything. It would have to, because that's where the projection of a universe of time and space is coming from in the first place. If it knows everything, it knows that there's really just one of us. And if it knows there's really just one of us, it will interpret whatever you think about the world or another person to really be about you. This is such an important point. That's a pretty sobering thought. People wonder why they are depressed, but just look at the garbage they've been thinking about other people their whole lives without realizing it was really just going to them and would determine how they feel about themselves, and ultimately even establish their own identity as they would see it and believe it. So another important aspect of the second step of forgiveness is that you understand you are forgiving the other person, not because they've really done something, but because they haven't really done anything, because you're the one who made them up in the first place. So this is something that I saw in my journey of undoing. I started to see, because I had projected the ego part of my mind, which I wasn't aware of. I just was upset by my dad. In this lifetime, everything was projected onto my dad. And as I started doing forgiveness with the Holy Spirit and taking responsibility for the thoughts, the ego thoughts in my mind, I started to become aware that I wanted my dad to be the guilty one. I wanted him to be there. In my mind, I wanted him to be the one that is guilty and nasty and mean, so I could say I'm innocent. And the ego says, look at how they are, and you're so innocent. So the ego is always judging and trying to make out your innocence, but it's like an internal desire for innocence. And it's a weird way, because we have to project that guilt out. And I realized I made him up. I realized I had to make him up. We all have to make some character here in the dream, the guilty one, and we become aware of it. Even if you're not aware of it now, and you're convinced that this person is mean and nasty, as you do forgiveness, you'll start to see in your mind how you made him up and you wanted him to be there. So you're forgiving that person because they haven't really done anything. That's why they're innocent. So they are truly innocent. They're innocent. Everyone, I mean, there's no bodies. It's just innocence. This kind of forgiveness leads to a reimagining of yourself. If they're guilty, you're guilty. So what happens is what we come to see, Jesus says that we find the guilt within, we project it out and we think it's in them. But it never leaves our mind. It's always in our mind. And you can become aware how the belief in guilt is the belief that we did something to God, left God, or, did something mean, or had a thought of separation and thought we'd done something wrong, it's going on every second of every day in time. It's not just something that happened once. Tiny mad ideas happening all the time, right? That we did something, because it's always going on. It's part of the ego. And so when we try to project guilt, when we say you're guilty, you're bad, you're mean, our mind hears that about us. So if you can notice that any time you're judging anyone else as nasty or mean or unkind, all those thoughts will be heard by your mind about yourself. That's why to see your brother as sinless and as innocent and as holy is the answer to see the true self. So that's how the Course works through relationships. So it heals your relationship by seeing, instead of seeing your brother through the ego, you're seeing it through the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit sees only love, sees only holiness. He shows you that your brother is the Holy Son of God, not the ego. So Jesus asks us not to see the ego in our brother, not to project. So once you realise that everything you judge and think about someone else is being heard by your mind about you, because nothing leaves your mind, right? Ideas leave not their source. You start to realise that's why you feel so terrible. You feel awful when you judge someone else. No, they don't feel bad. They only feel bad when they're judging everyone else. So everyone's only affected by their judgment of others. So your mind hears everything about others as being about you. So that's why it's very important to see the holiness, because then your mind hears how holy it is and it is healed through that way. And to start with, that's the Holy Spirit's job, that you will get so good at forgiveness. You'll start to operate purely in that Holy Spirit mind and see holiness until it becomes your true way of seeing. And that's when the Holy Mind, the Holy Spirit, is you. You become that mind. There's nothing to start with. You're calling on the Holy Spirit, but eventually you have your being in it. And that's just that's your way you are. That's what mind you're living in, the Holy Spirit mind. And it's not it's not separate from you. It is you. So this kind of forgiveness leads to reimagining of a self. If they're guilty, you're guilty. But if they're innocent, you're innocent. There's no way around it. That's because of a very important law of the mind that is articulated in A Course in Miracles. As you see him, you will see yourself. And that is such an important lesson, a huge important lesson from A Course in Miracles. And this is why we want to really, if we're sick of feeling anxious and depressed and sad and hopeless, we want to start to see our brother, his beauty, his Christ self. That's what we really want to do. We want to really get into seeing the holiness, not the body. The body's not holy. It's the inner spiritual eye, looking with the spiritual sight. Yes, it's vital at the same time that you do not stop there, as many students do. There's another very important part to all of this that most never consider. If it's true that as you see him, you see yourself, and if you go through life thinking the world and people are just illusions, your mind will interpret it to mean that you are an illusion. That's an important point, which I fell for too. I would walk around and say, you're an illusion, you're not there, you're an illusion. And that's not good, right? That's not the way to do this. We have to hold the idea that this world is an illusion in our minds, but not to say to people, you're an illusion. This will leave you feeling empty and meaningless, which is a really good description of depression. So this is why I love this section, because it's brought up all the scenarios that I fell for in my As I Did Forgiveness. And I did feel empty, as you say, because whatever you say about another, you hear about yourself. So if you walk around looking at others saying you're an illusion, you'll feel yourself to be an illusion. The best way to do it is walk around and saying to yourself, you are the Holy Christ, you are sinless, you're innocent. And that's the way to do this forgiveness. That's why A Course in Miracles is a lot more proactive than most people realize. It doesn't just describe the thought system of the ego, which is the thought system of most of the world. It completely replaces the thought system of the ego with the thought system of the Holy Spirit. That's what it does. It's so imperative that you combine the third step of forgiveness with the first two. The biggest mistake A Course in Miracles students, as well as other spiritual students, make when it comes to forgiveness is that they don't go all the way with it. Their forgiveness is too limited. That brings up the third step in forgiveness, which is based on the oneness of spirit rather than the chaos of an unstable and seemingly separate world. This is spiritual sight. You learn to see the way the Holy Spirit sees, and thus get in touch with what you really are. The Holy Spirit sees the love and innocence of spirit everywhere. In fact, the Course says, wherever he looks, he sees himself. Thus, the third step is what my teachers call spiritual sight, and what the Course also describes not only as vision, but as true perception. You change your own experience, and ultimately what you believe is your own identity by changing the way you think about and identify other people. As the Course tells us in the final section of the text, choose once again what you would have him be, remembering that every choice you make establishes your own identity as you will see it and believe it is. This is why it's vital to remember that the Holy Spirit does not think in terms of separation. The Holy Spirit thinks in terms of the wholeness and the oneness of spirit. Spiritual sight involves the way you think. With spiritual sight, you overlook the body, as well as the idea of individuality, and think outside the box. You think of that person not as just being part of the whole, but as being all of it. It's possible to carry on a normal conversation with someone and still acknowledge in your mind what they really are, which is perfectly one with God, and where they really are, which is the perfect oneness of heaven. And if you think about people that way often enough and long enough, eventually you can't help but experience that's what you really are and where you really are. That's the way the mind works. That's how Jesus got in touch with his own divinity. That's how Buddha awakened from the dream. That's how some of the other masters discussed in this book thought in different forms, but with the same idea that there exists the oneness of reality that's just beyond the veil of separation, and only this reality is true. That's non-duality. And being at cause, they were not a victim of the dream. They were the author of the dream. Then when the process of undoing the ego is complete, because all your forgiveness lessons are complete, and with no guilt left in the mind, the time comes when you lay the body aside for the final time and you awake and go home in God for the timeless reality of eternity. Forgiveness, when done correctly, leads to love automatically, because that is what you are. And love leads to peace. The practical application of these ideas by enough people can and will eventually lead not only to their enlightenment, but to world peace. And you can play your part in the healing of the collective mind of all beings. The world has been trying to achieve world peace in the wrong place out there on the screen. But by focusing in the right place, the time will come when world peace is finally achieved. That won't happen in this lifetime, but that doesn't matter. You can do your part now. Then you can awaken and go home. In the disappearance of the universe, my teachers and I were talking about the prospects for world peace when they said something very interesting. The people of the world will never live in peace until the people of the world have inner peace. That's because the Course teaches us that what we're seeing out there on the screen we call life is really the outside picture of an inward condition. In fact, the illusory world is just a symbolic representation of what exists in the one large hidden mind, or what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious. If what we're seeing is a reflection of that which is within, then as long as there's conflict in the mind, there will always be conflict in the world, whether it be war, murder, crime, terrorism, mayhem, or merely disagreements. But the day will come when enough people attain inner peace through the type of forgiveness that undoes the ego. When that happens, it will change everything. So I'm going to finish this third video here and continue on. Only got a little bit left. I'll finish this now. Thank you.